For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond.
This is The Space Shot, episode 449, Gemini and Mercury Remastered. My conversation with Andy Saunders. I'm John Mulnix. We're taking a quick break from the Lunar Era to chat with Andy about his latest book. Don't worry, part 4 of the Lunar Era will be out later this year. Part 5 will wrap up that series, and that episode will release in January. It will feature my conversation with Casey Dreyer from the Planetary Society. Now, without any further delay, let's chat with Andy about his latest book and about some of the awesome projects he's worked on over the past couple years. So today I'm talking with Andy Saunders. He is a best-selling British author, science writer, and one of the world's foremost experts on NASA digital restoration. I've had him on the podcast before. It's really cool to have him back. Since the first time I had you on, your work has been exhibited internationally. You're a best-selling author. You have your second book out now, which is one of the big things we're going to talk about today. But your first book, Apollo Remastered, was released for the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, which is pretty awesome. You've also released some of the images, like one of the ones with Neil Armstrong's face clearly visible, one of the only ones of that. You restored one of the images of the stricken Apollo 13 spacecraft, which was pretty incredible as well. So Apollo Remastered, phenomenal first book. But you didn't stop there. You had to do another one because we had the Mercury and Gemini programs, and the Mercury and Gemini Remastered Gemini Remastered is what we're going to talk about today. So Andy, welcome back to the Space Shot.
Well, thanks for having me back on, John. Yeah, it's been quite a while. Quite a lot's happened, I think, in both our lives since.
Just a little bit.
And yeah, I mean, it was always my intention to do this project next. It was the obvious next thing to do, having done Apollo Remastered, to go back in time and do what is in effect the prequel, to look at Mercury and Gemini. And that was, when I was working on the Apollo images, in fact, the Apollo 9 chapter, a lot of people said they loved that chapter of the book. They also said they liked the pre-Apollo chapter, which had some of the Gemini images in them. And I'd realized one of the key reasons that the Apollo 9 photography is so amazing is they actually took a slightly different camera. So they took a Hasselblad super wide camera. Didn't make it to the moon, unfortunately, but it was used on Apollo 9, and it was also used heavily on the latter Gemini missions. And that's one of the reasons that the photographs from Apollo 9 and from the latter Gemini missions are just absolutely stunning. But as well as obviously the historical significance of them, like I say, it was always the plan to work on this book next. And yeah, it's finally out.
Having both of them, they're both a treat. It's one of those books that it's nice to just pour yourself whatever kind of drink you have. If you have, a couple minutes here and there, even just leaf through random pages and read some of the stories that you have, and not just looking at the pretty pictures, which are just incredible with how you do that, but also the stories of these missions too. So when you started the first process of restoring those Apollo images, I know last time we spoke, you were talking about how it was a process similar to like astrophotography, where you were going through and like stacking those photos. Did anything change for Gemini and Mercury?
No, it's so the stacking is what I applied to the 16mm film. So that's the movie film that they took on Apollo with this DAC camera. They also had 16mm cameras on Mercury and Gemini. So because that's small format film, it's inherently noisy, lower quality. And so this stacking technique is perfect for almost making it photo-like. For any listeners, that we probably have some astrophotographers as part of your audience, and they'll know exactly what stacking is. It's quite difficult to explain why it works. So I give a lot of talks about, the photography and about NASA history and that kind of thing. And I always try to explain this in kind of thinking of it in an analog world. So if you think of, let's say you had 10 frames of movie film, like this cinefilm type film, and you literally cut it with a pair of scissors. And if you imagine you could put them on top of each other and perfectly align the image, which is the signal, and squish them together and look through it, you can probably imagine that signal, that image gets stronger. But crucially, the noise does not get stronger. because the noise is in a random place on every frame. So you improve the signal to noise ratio, and you can just pull out detail it's just invisible in one frame. So it's a really powerful process. So yeah, I applied that first to when I was frustrated that there was no image of Neil Armstrong on the moon because he held the camera.
Yeah.
And that's when I produced that image by using this technique on the 16mm film to produce that first clear image of him on the moon where we could see his face. It was recognisably Neil Armstrong. And that's what set me on this whole path. So yeah, I've applied that technique to this 16mm film, Mercury and Gemini. And then the other source of film and the other crucial bit about both books was using the original flight film. So everything we've seen since back in the day has actually been based on duplicate film because the originals were locked away in this frozen vault in Houston to maintain its condition. And have access to that, having digital scans of that and applying some digital processing to it, some time, some effort, we can pull out that kind of detail that we've never seen before. So the techniques were really very much the same as with Apollo.
And it was kind of just with how the technology for photography at that point in history, we kind of lucked out that there was such, incredible pieces of equipment like the Hasselblad cameras and some of the Nikon to take these photos. When you're working with like a medium format image, like that large format, how much detail are you able to pull out of those? I mean, it's got to be a lot once they're scanned in digitally, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, these scans. So NASA and we did a project with Arizona State University to digitally scan this original film, to get it out of the freezer, thaw it, and scan it. And they scanned it at just an incredibly high resolution, beyond the resolution of the film grain, but more crucially, a high bit depth. So even if something looks, and often does look, such as the front covers of both books, almost completely black, I'm thinking more the UK edition of Gemini. It's a different image to the US.
I do like that cover better, I will say. That's this beautiful picture.
Yeah, it's very similar to the Apollo one. And the two books are kind of a set. They're exactly the same size. And it covers everything from the first photograph of the curvature of Earth through to our last steps on the moon. So they're kind of a set. So the UK edition, has got the Ed White on the cover inside the spacecraft. It's very similar kind of feel to Apollo Remastered cover. Really underexposed, but so they look flat and relatively uninteresting straight out of this scanner, but they do hold an incredible amount of visual information. So this high bit depth means we're able to basically stretch the contrast. So even though we're working, say, on the lower end of black levels, there is actually a difference that's captured in these scans that we can effectively stretch and start to pull out that detail. Mm-hmm. So, brilliant scans allow us to pull out, things we've never been able to see before, essentially.
When you were working with these images, did you have like a story in mind that you wanted to tell? Like, walk me through the process of like actually sitting down and like figuring out like the narrative, as it were, for these books.
Yeah, I mean, it was an important element of both books that they're not just about the stunning imagery. Of course, that's kind of the focus of them. But what I really wanted to do, and this is perhaps even more so perhaps with Mercury and Gemini Remastered, is tell those stories, the human stories. People don't know a lot about the Gemini missions. I wanted to shine a light on those. So what I did with both books is basically break it down mission by mission. And I wanted to tell the story of each mission from launch to splashdown. So I had to get all the imagery in chronological order. So an image might be in the book because it's simply visually stunning, or it might be because it's of historical significance in terms of what's happening in it. It might be something that shows us something we've never seen before, or it might be something that was actually necessary, maybe not visually stunning, but necessary to tell the story. Now, because the Mercury missions obviously were a lot shorter, the Gemini missions were shorter, and they effectively went round and round and back down again, didn't they, versus going to the moon. So it was easier to tell all of the key things that happened on each mission through these captions. Mm-hmm. So that was part of the decision-making process, these different types of images, and how do I tell the story via the captions. So the captions in Mercury and Gemini are much longer than they were in Apollo, like I say, to try and tell the complete story. But that probably the research for the writing and putting it together was as time-consuming as actually doing the processing on this book. The historical record for Apollo is pretty good. I mean, when I was going through it that there were evidently kind of some mistakes and things and some patchiness. But Gemini, and then you go back to Mercury, they're much bigger gaps. So it took a lot more research to look at, are there any clues in the imagery? So in terms of, let's say they shoot a bit of film with a 16mm camera that's silent, and then they'll take a few photographs with one particular camera. And so those are in order, but then they might use a different camera and take it. And working out the order is very difficult. So I had to look for clues in the photographs. And it was all kinds of things, such as on Mercury, because they were filmed head on. And they had, for example, John Glenn's got the mirror on his chest. We can see the instrument panel reflected. We can see his straps. So, for example, booster engine cut off, I could see his straps change. Capsule separation, he'll say in the transcripts, okay, capsule separation, green light is on, and I can actually see that light. I've got maps of each of the instrument consoles, and I can actually see the light through the film come on, so I can say, right, there's a mark in the sand. I know exactly where we are. So I used all those kind of visual cues. The mission transcripts that are time-stamped were really useful, and it's also those transcripts that held, some of the conversations between the astronauts, which, when people read the book, I think they'd be quite surprised at just the level of risk that they were taking, particularly during Gemini. They were really 10 missions in 20 months, trying to catch up with the Soviets, pushing the boundaries, every mission building on the next. And like I say, they just took some quite extraordinary risk. And so a lot of that audio that was transcribed is mapped to the imagery in the book to help tell these stories.
Yeah, no, the Gemini program, the number of missions in such a condensed period of time that they did is just one of the things that I love about those missions. And that just, if you think of mid-century like photographs, mid-century just Kodachrome, I guess a lot of the films are not necessarily Kodachrome, but there was different, slightly different film technology for that. But just the colors on some of those images, they're just so incredibly iconic. And I don't know, when you think about how we imagined the future, I feel like a lot of that was inspired and kind of influenced by these images from this program.
I think you're right. I mean, it's got such like an intoxicating kind of aesthetic, Gemini. I mean, everything about it, the spacesuit, the spacecraft, and the way that film captured that and that whole era. Film was great for example, the tonal range and for capturing these black levels. So to see a super bright Earth against a super black sky, and then we see these what look today like kind of retro, but also still kind of futuristic suits and spacecraft, and these analog control panels. That's something else I want to do with these books, is allow us now to step on board and look around, see these pioneers, but also see the inside of the spacecraft. We look at the SpaceX vehicles today with the touchscreen, and we're suddenly hit with the view of an Apollo, whether it's a moon ship of the 1960s or these early Mercury and Gemini spacecraft, and just how rudimentary and analog, gloriously analog they look. These dials and switches and gauges, and that's the other thing I love about the whole era is they were flying these machines. They weren't flying themselves. And that whole rawness, that boldness, that go-getting attitude, to some extent, the risk-taking is... but yeah, the view, this intoxicating view is clearly referenced in modern-day sci-fi movies, films like Interstellar. You'll see all of these references of the way this 70mm film captured 1960s space exploration.
So, I mean, like, just I was flipping around as you're talking. I've been leafing through my copy, and I looked at one. It was from Gemini 6 and 7, when that mission, when they rendezvoused. And there's an image of the back of one of the Gemini spacecraft, and it's that gold foil, that reflective gold foil versus just the blackness of space. And it's just... It's a whole vibe, as people would say now. It's just fantastic.
And on Gemini 6 and 7, of course, that provided that opportunity to take photographs of spacecraft. I mean, the first photograph of a spacecraft in space was actually on Gemini 4. So there's a lot of firsts in the book. So the first photograph of the spacecraft in space was taken by Ed White on his spacewalk. So Alexei Leonov, the Soviets, did have a camera out on his spacewalk, but his suit ballooned so much he couldn't actually reach the shutter release. So he didn't take any photographs. So that meant that 3 weeks later, when Ed White went up and he could reach the shutter release, he took a camera and he became the first man to take photographs out in the void of space, and he captured the Gemini spacecraft.
So cool.
So we were able to get that first photograph. But Gemini 6A and 7 have allowed us to get really lots of images, because they took photographs of each other. If you flick, I'm doing this off the top of my head, I would say slightly backwards from where you are, you'll see the one of Jim Lovell through the window. So taken from 6A of Gemini 7, and there is Jim Lovell through the window. Of course, they got to within inches of each other, despite this being the first ever rendezvous in space. They got to within inches of each other, flying at 17,500 miles an hour. So yeah, there's some particularly stunning shots on that mission.
Definitely. And I just that mission in particular, I mean, spending almost 14 days inside the Gemini spacecraft, was there anything that stuck out during Lovell and Borman's mission to you from that? I'm sure they took probably a little bit more, a higher number of photos than a lot of the other missions. Was there anything from that mission particular that stood out to you?
There's one of Frank Borman in his, he could almost say underwear. I mean, it's the first time the US had an astronaut outside of the disrobed. They took the spacesuits off. There's one, now there might even be two Frank Borman in there. So that's a first photograph of them in the, as they would say now, shirt sleeves. And they look pretty tired in some of those photographs too. But it's the transcripts are what, yes, there's a lot of stunning imagery. There's those that are taken where you can see them through the windows. But then when you add in this, the context and what they were saying to each other at the time, for example, they said, "Oh, I can see you didn't wipe your mouth after your dinner," or they mentioned that the relative beard growth because, of course, Bowman and Lovell had already been up for, I think it was about 10 days by the time Gemini 6A actually came up to rendezvous.
That sounds about right.
So I just love that mix of seeing the imagery and seeing, the way they talk to each other as well.
Yeah, that's always one of my favorite missions. Obviously we could talk all day about just all the specifics for this, but what other human stories really stood out to you from these programs? I mean, we've talked a little bit about it, but is there anything when you were researching that stood out to you that really just you didn't know prior to researching it or restoring the photos?
I mean, again, these transcripts, when they were talking to each other away from, when they were out of ground contact, the astronauts would still talk to each other and it was still recorded on tape. And those conversations are particularly fascinating. So Gemini 4, it's quite amusing listening to them talking about the incidents that happened during the spacewalk. For example, when Ed White got back in, they couldn't close the hatch. So because it had been exposed to the colder space, the seal had got harder, and they really struggled to close the hatch. And they describe what they were doing at the time, like, I was holding on to you and I was pulling you down, and we were saying heave, heave, and actually laughing about it, even though, this was an incredibly tense moment, of course.
Yeah.
Also, when Chris Kraft came over on the mic and said, "Get back in, Ed, get back in." But the thing that surprised me most when they were talking later is Mission Control just read up and said they wanted Ed White's views of how it went. Did he become disorientated? They were really concerned about that before the flight, and just asked him about his experience in general. And as he was explaining, he just kind of casually said, "Oh yeah, and then when I was walking on the spacecraft about XYZ, and when I read it, I was like, walking on the spacecraft." And then they just carried on talking about, a lot of technical stuff. But Mission Control obviously clearly clocked this as well. But it wasn't until the following day that they were talking to Ed White again and said, yesterday you said when you were walking on the spacecraft, but you weren't actually walking on it, were you? And he said, yes, yeah, I was. I got to the back of the adapter section, and I got my feet on the top of the spacecraft, and the gold umbilical that we can see, he tugged on that so he could lock his feet onto the top of the spacecraft, and he pulled the umbilical, and he literally walked on the roof of the spacecraft, and it just hit me that Alexei Leonov may have been the first spacewalker, but Ed White was the first to literally walk in space.
That's so cool. What they found out doing those first spacewalks, those first EVAs, the importance of things like handrails, actually being able to lock your feet in eventually. So like, that's what I love about this program too, is like so many of the things that NASA discovered during Gemini really set the stage for Apollo.
And they were just so risky. It's even, as you're reading it, you're thinking, have they not thought about this particular element? Of, for example, again, of Ed White's EVA, there's a moment where Jim McDivitt says, Ed, I've lost you. I can't see you. Where have you gone? And he said, well, I'm at the back near the adapter section. In fact, I'm near the thrusters, so don't thrust now.
Oh my gosh.
Again, I'm reading that and thinking, was that the critical control measure to ensure that, a hole isn't burnt in the suit and it's instant death? But, it's almost like an afterthought. Oh, by the way, yes, please don't thrust. And again, it's just that. But that was the attitude. We just got to get on, and they learned, if you like, on the job, and then move forward to the next mission. So, yeah. And the amount that was covered, all the critical techniques and things that would be necessary to be able to reach for the moon on Apollo were all tested during Gemini, long duration space flight, rendezvous, docking, mastering EVAs, but it took them a long time to master EVAs. Gene Cernans was, he should quite rightly have died out on his EVA.
Yeah.
Michael Collins lost his Hasselblad. That was cut short. Richard Gordon was cut short because sweat dripped into his eye and he would go blind if sweat dripped into the other eye. So it was only really by Gemini 12 and Buzz Aldrin who was able to train in a swimming pool. So, that's where the whole neutral buoyancy training kind of started. Finally, NASA got a grip of how to maneuver outside of a spacecraft. But again, just in terms of highlighting how rapid things were, it was almost like we said, okay, we had a disaster on that EVA. Next EVA, that was a disaster. Next one nearly died. Oh, Buzz's went well. Right, that ticked off. Right, let's go to the moon. It's almost like, as it transpired, there was only one more EVA before Armstrong and Aldrin, performed the ultimate EVA on Apollo 11, and that was on Apollo 9, Rusty Schweickart, and that was also cut short. So it was just that was the pace, but that was the attitude. That was, we'll catch them with the Soviets. We've got to get to the moon first, and they took these risks.
Yeah, the appetite for risk during these missions was a little bit higher than we would ever see today, really.
Yeah, and that's why when I talk to people who don't know a lot about space or space history, they say, why haven't we gone back to the moon? But there hasn't been a political situation whereby you can spend the amount of money or take that level of risk. You can't offer an astronaut a 50-50 chance of coming home anymore. Everything's got to be 99%, and that takes time. It takes more money, and that's why it's taken us over part of the reason over 55 years to go back.
Well, and during the amount of time that's passed too, the entire generations have worked and retired since we last stepped foot on the moon. How do you think your work really helps inspire and inform, the current and future generations?
God, just if it can go any way at all to do it, that'd be incredible. My objective really is I do want to share this history just with as many people as possible. I'm passionate about it. I get frustrated when some people think that Neil Armstrong was the only person that went to the moon, or perhaps nobody went to the moon. I mean, that's even worse, isn't it? But
Yeah.
a lot of people just think there was only an Apollo 11. People think, we just designed a Saturn V and off Neil Armstrong ones. And, so that's the beauty of what I want to do with this book is it was a process. I want to reconnect people with that, with the bravery and the human ingenuity it took to send people into space for the first time, and hopefully gets people excited about the future. So, yeah, I mean, Jim Lovell, of course, sadly, recently passed away.
Yeah.
He's featured in the book heavily. Managed to get him to see it before he passed away, and he gave us that wonderful quote for the back cover. And what he wants the book to do is just share with the awe and wonder that he experienced when he looked out of that window on those first missions into space, and remind us all of the beauty of our home planet. So if it can go any way to doing that, that would be pretty special.
I couldn't agree more. Oh, this is a beautiful sentiment. One of the other ways that you've been reaching a lot of people is the Moonwalkers. Can you talk a little bit about that project, what it was like being involved with something that massive?
Yeah, it was a brilliant experience. I'd seen the Van Gogh experience on a weekend away. I think it's pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And I went in, my family weren't interested in going in. But I was working on the book at the time and the images, and I thought, let's see this technology. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, why project paintings if you could project high quality photographs? And I know we've got these panoramas. You could, walk on the moon, in effect. So I'd kind of parked that idea for a while, and then I sent this proposal to quite a lot of immersive companies, and one got back to me who'd had, the same idea. Tom Hanks was involved. Tom had sent them a copy of my book, so he loved Apollo Remastered.
Awesome.
One thing led to the other, and Chris Riley involved, who is a great space filmmaker based here in the UK. And we produced it in about 4 months' time, and it's brilliant. And the music's great. You've seen it, haven't you? You've seen the.
I got to see it. Yeah, in Houston, it was incredible.
Yeah, so that was all kinds of things have really come off the back of working on this imagery, and that's brilliant. I do exhibitions, so photographic exhibitions. I give talks on like IMAX screens and lectures and that kind of thing. So I'm just, I do feel very lucky to be able to work on something that I'm just so passionate about.
It's pretty sweet. I hope we can get you out here to Kansas at some point.
I would absolutely love to get to the Cosmosphere, as you know. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully next year.
Sounds good. Well, are there any other plans that you've got? I mean, we've got a whole nother program. I mean, the shuttle program.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious thing.
That's another beast.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they used film, well into the shuttle era, and so it would kind of make sense. That would be the obvious thing to do, is to do the sequel to Apollo Remastered, and cover the whole of space on film, if you like,
and Skylab too.
Yeah,
don't forget Skylab.
Skylab, Apollo, Soyuz. So that would kind of be the obvious thing. I just need to be sure. I've been doing this now, kind of crazy hours, and pretty much nothing else for 6.5 to 7 years. Each book takes a huge amount. Not just the processing, and then the writing, and then the design, and then getting it, the publicity and that kind of thing. So it is such a big commitment. I just need to be sure what it is that I would want to do next. I may perhaps even revisit Apollo 11. I'd quite like to do Apollo 11 in more detail, because in Apollo Remastered, of course, I'm covering the whole Apollo program. So I think there are still maybe 30 or 40 images in there. But to cover more, of course, of that most iconic mission is also an attractive proposition. But I'm going to have a year off, first of all, my eyes are rest, and then think about what's to come.
So one of the big things that in podcasts and social media generally is we see a lot of like AI slop. If you've been on Meta or Threads or Twitter, this day and age, we're just kind of inundated with fake videos, essentially. One of the incredible things about these images is there's no AI processing done on these.
No, and it's a valid point, and something that's quite important to point out, because these are such historically significant images, I didn't want to apply any kind of AI to processing them. I think when you apply AI to a photograph, you can almost no longer call it a photograph. You could call it perhaps a piece of art or a representation of, but if we don't know what's been changed by AI, then a photograph just loses all of its provenance. So because this is just such important historical footage, I didn't ask completely steer clear of AI. My objective really has never been to embellish or reinvent, but to just reveal, to peel back the layers of aging and degradation and duplication and noise, and just to reveal what was always inherent in that film, but to show it in a way we've never been able to see before, and it is clearly, but yet still as faithfully as possible.
Which is really, one of the incredible things about a camera like, the Hasselblads and some just the higher quality cameras today. If you have an iPhone or a Samsung or whatever your smartphone is, when you take a picture, it's not like a picture. There's so much, Apple calls it computational photography or whatever. And they're basically just baking in all of that stuff. And that's one of the other things that makes these images from the space program so special, is this is how that sensor captured the light on the film, 280 some odd thousand miles away for Apollo, or, orbiting Earth during Mercury and Gemini. That's one of the things that I just find so absolutely incredible about these pictures is you can't fake it.
Yeah.
I talked with Dr. Roger Launius for a current series that I'm doing, and like the moon landing deniers, he was pretty blunt in his assessment of their thinking abilities. And yeah, it's just, that's what, these images are so special, because it is a literal snapshot of that moment in history.
Yeah, I've been through, for Apollo, 35,000 pieces of film. For Gemini and Mercury, another 5,000. You can't fake 35,000 pieces of film. It would be literally easier to go to the moon and just take the photographs than it would be to fake the film. And you're right in what you say about, the way digital, even just a digital camera now, all kinds of processing is still going on. So what comes out of the other end, the beauty, as you say, of these photographs is that light hit that film, and that's it. There was no other kind of interference. So what I'm working on is the raw file of that. So I know this is how the light hit that piece of film, and then as I'm processing it, and unfortunately, we don't need to use AI to get incredible results. Even with the stacking process on the film, I've seen AI have a go at doing this, and it at first glance it looks kind of clean, but you lose detail. And if you inspect it more closely, it almost looks like a sketch. It's actually not that great. At first glance, it looks kind of smooth and things. Whereas the stacking technique is an incredibly powerful technique, but doesn't, nothing new is added.
Yeah.
We're simply taking information from multiple frames and bringing it into one, so that we know what we're looking at is historically and absolutely correct, which for this footage was the only option open.
It's a picture of reality, not a representation of reality.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I guess I have one other question. So we've got the Artemis missions coming up. Let's say we put Andy Saunders in charge of all of the, the photographs, the video for these missions. What's your, dream kind of setup for them to take to the moon?
It would be lovely for them to just take one Hasselblad film camera. They're very heavy, though, I must say. I've got a couple here in my office. And that's the first thing you notice when you pick up one of these older style cameras, is just how heavy they are. And you think about how many they took in the magazines they took. So, of course, it's not practical to take film, but perhaps to take one camera. The kind of shots I would love to see, something I always dreamed of, and I still imagine being at Tranquility Base, having a camera at Tranquility Base, watching Eagle come in out of the sky from Earth and land and see Armstrong and Aldrin climb out. That's just this kind of fantasy visual I have. So it'd be great to have, probes there before the event, when we eventually land on the moon, and watch these Earthlings actually arrive. That'd be pretty pretty spectacular. I know the crews are. I was lucky enough to spend some time with
That'd
the
be
Artemis
cool.
2 crew because they were involved with the Moonwalkers show. They've got lots of copies of Apollo Remastered in the astronaut office for kind of inspiration. I know they're keen and will get great photographs. The only concern is we will be absolutely inundated with imagery. There'll be eventually 360-degree head cams and VR, and it'll be ticked up to death. So I do have a little bit of a worry that it will become blasé to it. You think of imagery today; it's such a transient thing. Oh, look, there's a whole Earth, and then it's gone at the swipe of a finger, and there's a cat wearing some shoes. Or what I want to do with the books is pause on these photographs, put them into context. Things like the blue marble on Apollo 17. Yes, it's a visually stunning image, and we see it a lot. But it's tempting. But like if a youngster happens to see it on Instagram, they'll just look at that, that's nice. Flick, gone. But what I want to do is put them into perspective. What photographs were taken just before, just after? What was happening? What were the astronauts saying when they were looking at this view? And when you could consider the fact that there were 3 men in a tiny capsule flying at 20,000 miles an hour away from their home planet, and one of them lifted the cameras to the window, released the shutter, and took that photograph of the whole Earth amongst the endless blackness of space. I think it's that context that really makes images like that hit home. So I hope, that there will be another blue marble photograph taken, and that people perhaps take a moment to appreciate exactly how it's taken.
That is a perfect spot to end. I love that idea. Links to the book, obviously, I'm going to include those in the show notes. Are there any websites or ways people should follow you?
It was ApolloRemastered.com is the website.
Okay.
And then I've got the socials, Apollo Remastered Facebook page, and then the Andy Saunders _1 on X and Instagram.
Okay, I'll make sure those are all in the show notes. And Andy, I just want to say thank you for coming on the podcast again. And whenever you make it out to Kansas, coffee, breakfast, lunch, whatever is on me. So
perfect. I look forward to that. And thanks again, John, for having me on.
Of course. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening to The Space Shot. As always, please leave a rating or review in your podcast platform of choice. It helps more people find out about the show and all of the work that I'm doing here. You can also support the work I'm doing by checking out my store, Starlight and Gleam. There are some really cool space-themed pieces that would make a great Christmas present for the space enthusiast in your life. If you'd like to ask a question, you can also reach me at 720-772-7988. Just leave a message and I might play it during an upcoming Q&A episode that I'm going to do after the Lunar Era series wraps. You can also check out my Substack for more updates, looks behind the scenes, and even more space history. Until next time, I'm John Molnix, and I'll catch you on the flip side.